Hello and welcome. My name is Sean Johnson Andrews. Welcome to Breaking Culture Live. Uh, I'm the host today. I'm the immediate past president of the Cultural Studies Association. I'm broadcasting you today from the north side of Chicago. And we're really pleased to welcome Stephen Salaita, who is the professor and chair of the Department of English and Comparative Literature at the American University of Cairo. Um, on the university website, it claims that he's the author of 8 books, but by my calculation, there are at least 3 new ones for us to discuss today. His memoir, An Honest Living, published in 2024 by Fordham University Press, and his 2 novels, Daughter, Son, and Assassin, and Jerry and Rodrigo Go to War, both published by Common Notions Press. I hope we can talk about all of these, and perhaps more pressingly, the concept of scholasticide, which he's spoken about at a few recent events. So thanks so much for joining us today, Stephen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
In this, the subtitle of An Honest Living is A Memoir of Peculiar Itineraries, and that's a very apt way to put it. In a lot of ways, your peculiar itinerary maps onto the peculiarity of our last decade. For those who don't know, you gained what you call notoriety in 2014 for some tweets that you wrote about a previous Israeli bombardment. I mean, which isn't to say that it's ever really stopped, but this was another moment where there was a massive bombardment in Palestine. And you then experienced an early iteration of this sort of weaponization of anti Semitism when some Zionist trustees objected to your hiring at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And your story became the story of the collapse of academic freedom in the US. And then you embark on a new career as a bus driver, which is interrupted by the pandemic. And now you've returned to the academy there in Cairo when all those forces that have attacked you are now weaponized in a new way. Israel's genocide in Palestine has reached a new catastrophic stage, and virtually every major country other than Egypt is embroiled in a war of choice that has already killed thousands of people. That is quite an itinerary. It's got to make your head spin a little bit. It would me anyway. I don't know. Uh, um,
It does. I think everybody's heads are spinning a little bit right now. So it yeah. It was at Illinois Champaign Urbana actually.
oh, was it
I
Champaign
don't want to.
Urbana? Oh no.
I
Okay. Well,
don't. I mean, I don't want to implicate Chicago. I mean, maybe it deserves it. I don't know, but
well, that that's
I'm
that
not
that
allowed to work in the anywhere in the University of Illinois system ever again.
really.
So, but
Uh,
yeah, that was
I
part
think
of
I
the
was I
settlement
think I was
agreement.
hoping you were going to be closer to me when you when you were going to be here. I paid close attention when all of it was happening, but I forgot that it was Urbana Champaign. Um,
Yeah,
but the entire system is implicated anyway. So,
yeah,
um, all
exactly.
joke all joking aside, how are you and your family doing? What's the mood in Cairo right now?
Hmm.
What does it feel like there?
I and my family are well, thankfully. We're in good health and life is okay. We feel, incredibly fortunate for lots of reasons. The mood in Cairo is it's difficult to gauge. A lot of it depends on where you're at.
Sure,
Among the so-called expat community, life is the same. Life always seems the same, for these privileged communities in global south spaces. They don't really feel the effects of geopolitics unless it impacts them directly, like maybe it would impact them directly in Iraq or Jordan, or in the Gulf right now. But I think for Egyptians, there's the vast majority of Egyptians, the ones who aren't in the middle to upper class range, there's tremendous inflation. And this is a worldwide problem, but it's hitting Egypt
sure,
particularly hard. There's currency devaluation, so there's a great amount of economic insecurity. I would say maybe more than political insecurity at the moment, but I think that the two are interrelated anyway. But life is, for a great majority of Egyptians, has been hard for a long time, and it's getting even more difficult. So I think the mood is somewhat tense.
Yeah. Well, I want to get your thoughts on this present war and, of course, the kind of ongoing genocide. Um, but I want to start a bit closer to the start of the memoir. I agree with your assessment of your story. Beginning back I mean, it begins much earlier, the memoir, of course, which actually I feel like I feel a lot of kinship with. I was in graduate school in the early 2000s as well, and in Northern Virginia, actually. Um, but I agree with your assessment of your story when you say that in the memoir you say it generated so much interest because it evokes a common fear among academics of being left without a job and inadequate training for anything else. My situation speaks to the widespread precariousness and insecurity within the profession. A lot of academics fear that they're half a step from indigence. For the precarious, I embody that particular kind of worry. And I certainly feel that kind of worry in a very embodied way. um, I was terminated in August. But the weaponization of anti-Semitism that you experienced in your career has now expanded at a sort of industrial scale. I spoke with some students in Baltimore yesterday who were talking about Turning Point setting up a chapter there. My former co-host had to all but bow out of any public discussions for fear of reprisals from his Texas University employers. And of course, there's the Trump administration's attack on major universities, those universities' cowardly compliance, and all of this made more palatable by the previous administration's crackdown on student protests against Palestinian genocide. What does all this look like to you, having experienced it at an earlier stage?
Mm. Probably in lots of ways the same that it looks from you and your vantage point. First, let me say that I'm really sorry to hear about your termination. That's I wanted to express empathy and solidarity with you and with anybody else who is going through troubles in their academic or non-academic job. It's pretty much an epidemic now, as you point out. I When I look back at sort of all the controversy that erupted around the Illinois thing, and it's been over a decade now,
Yeah,
it seems in a way almost quaint, compared to what's happening in the moment. I like your terminology of industrial scale, and
yeah,
I find myself very often wishing that it weren't so easy for demagogues, both liberal and conservative, but mostly conservative, to create moral panics around the university. But unfortunately, and for various reasons, the university or campus is a wonderful site for moral panic, and it's been that way for a long time in the United States. And these take hold. It's gotten to the point really where universities can't function as supposed higher education institutions, and certainly individuals with a conscience are finding it much more difficult to function as well. This gets at one of the concepts that we wanted to discuss, the concept of scholasticide, and how it really strangles the life of the university. It impedes research. It impedes anything even resembling activism, much less activism that's actually challenging, centers of power or authority. It's just a really, really ugly situation, and we kind of had an inkling. It's around the issue of Palestine. There's always been pretty overt repression, and
yeah.
so we always knew that the conditions existed to where this sort of, I don't even know how to describe it, this wave of counterinsurgency was always viable, was always a possibility. But I have to admit that even in my most pessimistic moments, it was hard for me to picture it coming to this, because this current moment is quite unbelievable. It's spectacular, and it's very difficult for me to imagine, the university or idea of the university returning to what it once was.
Well, I think that's a theme I want to kind of cover throughout our talk today. And I want to hear a little bit more about this concept of scholasticide and kind of how you outline it, what you mean by that. When I was first sort of thinking about it, I also imagined it had something to do with the destruction of libraries and schools as part of the ongoing genocide in Gaza and Palestine. Um, and I kind of wonder if you could say a little more about this concept of scholasticide and whether you see the collapse of the U.S. Academy as a sort of morbid symptom of that other environment, or a tangential cause of it.
Okay. I actually see it as, the destruction of U.S. academe and maybe even Western academe more broadly. But
Hmm.
I don't know enough about the landscape in Europe to really say. But I would conceptualize it as part and parcel of the Zionist scholasticide in Palestine, which isn't to say, of course, that it is as severe or maintains the same characteristics. But if we start at the origin in Palestine, Israel has had a deliberate policy of destroying Palestinian universities, and in fact ended up destroying with brutal, horrific efficiency every university in the Gaza Strip, and it has destroyed in full or part a number of higher education institutions in the West Bank as well. So, as I said, this is a deliberate policy, and the reason for the policies or the reason are manifold. But it's a way of destroying any possibility of Palestinian civil society. And so by destroying the universities, they're destroying an economic sector. First of all, an important economic
Sure,
sector in the Gaza Strip, but they're destroying research centers. They're destroying gathering spaces. They're really destroying one of the what would presumably be the backbones of development for an independent Palestinian nation. So they're making that impossible, and so it was deliberate in that sense. But I would say that the destruction of, or the ongoing destruction of, let's say, academic freedom, and because the campuses aren't physically being destroyed per se,
sure.
in the United States is an extension of that policy. It's an extension of the genocide. Anything that can be seen as a hostile environment to the Israeli state, to the desires of Zionism, to the settler colony are verboten, and they get overrun. And I want to make a distinction. It's what's happening in the United States is certainly different than what's
Sure.
happening in the Gaza Strip in lots of important ways. But I think that a part of the practice of genocide is also destroying any centers of information that might contest that or document that genocide, and we see that happening in the United States. It's really more than any, right wingers have always sort of had a hard on for academe, but nowhere have they gotten a stronger foothold than through Zionism and pro-Israel sentiment as a way to sort of run roughshod over everything. The DEI stuff has been quite effective, but what
Yeah.
what we were seeing around activism, for Palestine, or even anti-genocide activism, we saw the police get involved. We've seen people have their degrees rescinded. A lot of professors have been fired or otherwise punished. Students have been arrested. In fact, some of them are just emerging from prison,
From jail.
within the
Yeah.
past week or two. Some have been deported. They've been snatched off of the streets. We have videos of them being, this is unbelievable stuff. This is just insane, and it's made possible in part as of the of a form of a control around what can be said, about the Zionist genocide. So for that reason, I think the two exist really in the same orbit, let's say.
In a sort of continuum,
Yeah,
a grim
exactly.
a grim continuum. Uh, and now, and I don't. I think you kind of already said a little bit about this, but I noticed that sort of throughout the memoir, and indeed in the latest novel, you also seem to just generally have some disdain for the U.S. Academy in general. And this is sort of on maybe on the other side, or on the set aside the scholasticide that's happening. But we have these cowardly compliant universities, which in a lot of ways, I think you kind of characterize many of the people in academia, well, especially the administrators, as having, as kind of being already set up to do exactly what they're doing here, right? That this is kind of endemic to these institutions. But even these sort of provincial professors in small rural colleges that we see in the latest novel, I identify with this disdain and this ambivalence, and I'm also struck by there being a need to have something like these, institutions, if not these institutions. Um, so I know you have a lot of ambivalence about all this, but what is redeeming about these scholastic institutions, and can they be saved? Even before the scholasticide that we're seeing, what do you see as redeeming about them, and what if anything can be saved?
Mm, that's a wonderful question. Obviously, I could talk for hours about what I disdain about them. But
Sure, sure.
I
Well,
can't
no,
imagine
or
anybody.
many pages. No,
Yeah,
it's good.
yeah,
It's good.
exactly. But I think the reasons for disdain have become quite explicit over the past few years. But I'm there's always an ambivalence with me. I'm assuming as with you as well, and probably lots of other people that I don't know that it would be possible to articulate so much disdain without a concordant feeling of affection. That
Mm, mm,
the disdain is in a way it's an after effect of a certain kind of disappointment, or for those of us who have been harmed in these institutions, maybe even a response to a kind of trauma, because
sure,
losing your job, being repressed, being slandered, these produce traumas, right? And disdain is one among many trauma responses, but I think it's also a response to a sense of mourning, maybe
sure,
an underlying belief in the university as an institution. Because I have really, I grew up in a small town in southern Appalachia. I was not a high achiever in my very poor and poorly run public schools. I really found myself, as cliche as that sounds, as an undergraduate student. I learned how much I love literature and how much I love writing, and just meeting people from different parts of the country and the world. And these are wonderful, warm experiences for me. I've had wonderful, warm experiences also as a professional on campus. I'm having a really nice experience at AUC in Cairo, for instance. Have had many terrible experiences also, but we'll leave those aside for now. I guess if you wanted to find something redeeming about the academy, it's been a pathway for upward mobility for
sure,
lots of people from so-called underrepresented communities, for ethnic and religious minorities. It's been a way for young people from around the world to come to the United States to experience life in a different country, to learn a new language, to and in many cases to go back home and help build their own communities. It's been a space that has nurtured the arts and literature in various ways. I don't want to paint too rosy a picture of it, but
sure,
I think to do away with the entire idea of the university is simultaneously to do away with the idea of pedagogy, and I'm not prepared to do that. There's always going to be room in our lives as human beings for reading and writing and thinking and teaching and communicating and then learning for one another, and at its very best and optimally, that's why, or one of the reasons why a university exists. Now,
Yeah. Well, and
these
I mean,
days, go ahead, go ahead.
well, and all of the sort of values you just kind of laid out sound like the anathema of all of the things that the current Trump administration, wants to attack. Starting with something like DEI, but having pathways for people to kind of open their minds. There's sort of research about that was published kind of earlier this year talking about, well, the people who go to college tend to sort of be less likely to end up in this sort of MAGA bubble because they're, like you're saying, they're meeting people from across the country. They sort of ask different kinds of questions. There's a different mental preparedness, or kind even like emotional preparedness for having kind of a empathy for other ways of life. And so that does sound like the kind of stuff that we want to happen in universities. That in its ideal, that's exactly what we would hope would happen. Archives, libraries, collecting knowledge, collecting evidence. All of this also seems to be under attack, whether we're talking about the NIH or um, any number of the other museums and libraries around the country that the administration is sort of like openly attacked, simply because they provide a narrative that's different than the one they're trying to create.
Yeah, yeah, I think the view, that I just expressed, which I'll probably hold on to until the day I die,
Sure.
it's romantic and possibly even utopian. But if we're thinking about, again, the idea of a university, I think of the idea of a university in the context of pedagogy, and there is something romantic and utopian about pedagogy when it's done well. But I also don't want to downplay the less savory functions
Sure.
of the university for a very long time. Like Israeli universities, for example, are profoundly complicit in military occupation and in genocide. And then in the U.S. universities, a lot of the research, has been performed in service of corporate hegemony, arms manufacturing, these sorts of
Absolutely.
things. The, the American University or many of the land grant universities exist on indigenous territory, and so
Sure.
all of these sorts of things. It's when I think maybe some of the ambivalence that arises is, again, where we're sort of trying to navigate, the aspects of teaching and thinking and writing and researching and information gathering, that are supposed to happen as against the cold hard institutional realities that now we're dealing with, multi-billion-dollar corporations. I remember being in grad school. This would have been the early 2000s, and reading the
Sure.
Chronicle. And I'm gonna have to go check the archives to see if I'm just like, making something up in my head. But I remember there being an article in the Chronicle. We used to get it in hard copy back then, of course. One
Sure.
would come to the
Department
community
and
room in English
yeah,
department.
yeah.
Yeah, and it was about how Swarthmore had become, the it had just become a $1 billion endowment, and that was very like
Oh,
rare
okay.
for a liberal arts school. So this is the early 2000s, and now, and so that was kind of like novel back then. And now, if you look at the endowments, like so many over them are in the multi-billion dollars. They're very close to a
Absolutely.
$1 billion. They have real estate holdings. They have very robust police departments. Their boards are filled with CEOs and so-called captains of industry. And I think it's difficult for us to sort of square the circle of, these very corporatized, wealthy institutions that play a role in imperialism, that play a role in dispossession, that play a role in economic inequality, with what it is that we feel that we're there to do,
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
to work against that grain. And when the tension becomes too explicit, it's we who get punished, and the institution keeps on going.
Well, and I think that then highlights why something like your case and something like the cases of other folks who get fired for speaking or tweeting or whatever, that suddenly the sort of the benefit or the good stuff that was supposed to come from being okay with all of this the awfulness, that contradiction does you can't sustain that contradiction anymore. It sort of becomes, well, this we have to we have to say something because we can't do the thing that makes any of that other stuff worth putting up with. So,
Exactly. Yeah,
um,
exactly.
now and I don't know how frank you can say it, but like, what is the difference that you find in? And I know it's the American University of Cairo, so I don't know exactly what that means institutionally in terms of who helps to kind of administer it. But is there a different environment there uh, than you found at other colleges and universities in the states?
Hmm. Yeah, and I can be as frank, that the to the extent that my knowledge of the place allows me. I'm here, and I teach, I write when I get the opportunity. I have a very friendly and cordial relationship with my colleagues, but I don't really socialize or partake of the social life of the institution, let's say. So there are a lot of things about AUC that I'm still unaware of, but it is technically a U.S. university. All of our instruction, or most of our so the great majority of our instruction is in English. There's some courses that are offered in Arabic. And there's a continuing education center that does stuff in Arabic. But we're accredited in the United States, offices in New York. There's a relationship, a formal relationship with the U.S. Embassy, i.e., with the State Department. So, it's an interesting contradiction in that the ties of the American University in Cairo with the U.S. government are much more explicit than most universities.
Sure,
But
sure,
the leeway that we have on campus seems much wider to me. So we have to worry about pressure from let's say American interests or American shareholders as stakeholders,
sure,
according to the new parlance, the board of trustees, the investors,
sure.
the embassy. But we also have to worry about the Egyptian state, and the Egyptian state, I think, closely monitors what goes on campus. Who comes onto campus, who leaves campus, what they're saying when they're on campus. So all of these things are in people's minds, and we're all aware of if not an explicit set of limitations of things that might rightly cause some anxiety. At the same time, and here I'm only speaking of my experience, as a U.S. citizen, I know that Egyptian citizens would have a different experience and a different relationship with the campus and the country. So with the U.S. passport and
Sure,
being a
sure.
foreigner here and all of those things, it I feel like I can discuss things openly in the classroom and in my writing and on campus in general than I ever would or was able to in the United States. There I've never had, and I'm knocking on wood here, any issue, in discussion of Palestine. Not
Sure,
everybody agrees about
sure.
Palestine or the politics of the region more broadly, but there are, nobody's an explicit Zionist either, not among the students. Maybe there are a few, right? But everybody's heart here is with Palestine, and their politics are geared in one way or another towards, Palestine's liberation. So whatever disagreements exist in a framework that doesn't even happen in the United States. It's not a question of whether Palestine should be free or not. The answer for everybody here is an obvious yes. and in the United States, that question is still very much in dispute in a way that it's not here. So here, maybe the debate would look like, should Palestine be religious or secular?
Sure.
Is Hamas good or not good? Is this party good or not good? Like these sorts of things. 'Cause in the United States,
Civilized conversations about about
yes,
about
exactly,
about a state rather than
exactly.
whether people should exist.
Exactly, and that's the nature of
Yeah,
the conversation in the United States. Like, you know, are Palestinians human? Do Palestinians deserve like
human rights
basic
and
rights? Yeah,
representation and water.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
well, that I mean, that should be the baseline for all universities, but, I'm glad that you're in a place where that's the case, and
yeah.
we'll all have to look for the hiring calls for the University of Cairo. Um, so I wanna switch gears a little bit. You said in your memoir that you began working as a professor because you wanted to be a writer, which I also feel that. Now that you've published 2 novels in addition to the other 9 books of scholarship to memoir, do you feel a sense of accomplishing what you set out to do or having accomplished some of what you set out to do?
Yes and no. I am. I have to confess. You know, proud that I have managed to write, two novels that I'm pleased with, that I like, that felt good to write and felt good to publish. But on the other hand, I'm a little bit or a lot neurotic, so I'm always self-conscious about anything that gets into print, and I really don't exist in the literary or the creative writing world, meaning that I have no social or professional presence, like sort of in
Sure, sure.
in MFA spaces, or
Yet,
just
yet.
all of those things.
I haven't finished your latest novel, which for those listening is titled Jerry and Rodrigo Go to War. But it feels like a real departure from the first one.
Yeah.
What's the inspiration for the book? And I was especially interested in like where do you get Jerry's voice? What is this? Where does this voice come from? 'Cause it seems very
Jerry's voice,
specific.
which is, for those of you who haven't read it yet, which I'm presuming is everybody and anyone who's listening. He speaks in dialect, a Southern Appalachian dialect, and the voice more generally is one of, I guess, kind of you know uh, a working class white dude from Appalachia who's rather cynical about everything. He's really a composite of what I grew up around, and the people I grew up around. He's both a composite and a hodgepodge, but he carries a lot of I think maybe my own voice there in the kind of
Hmm,
not completely, but in the kind of cynicism he expresses towards notions of civic responsibility, and a civic life. And there's really a skepticism about the utility of being a good citizen, of voting, of doing the right thing, of being conscientious, of following the rules. He's very defiant, and in his defiance, I identify pretty strongly with Jerry. But yeah, Jerry is really meant to be, you know, uh, uh, a particular Appalachian character that is familiar to me, from my childhood and on into my adulthood. To the extent that I still interact with these sites of my childhood.
sure. Well, and a unique one. You don't usually. I don't think there's many representations of Appalachia and education, or like higher education. So I think that's a unique. We don't normally have that set of representations put together. Um, just in the dominant culture anyway. So it's interesting to have him be an instructor or professor. I was really glad when he didn't. sleep with a student. That was that made the rest of the book easier for me to get into. Um, you spoken a bit about on Facebook. I've seen you kind of talk a little bit about the disjuncture of promoting this book about Appalachia, an Appalachian college drama while in the midst of a war and an ongoing genocide, which is sort of a version of the question of whether there can be any poetry after Auschwitz, I guess. But I
Mm.
mean, how has this? What? I know this wasn't your plan, right? You wrote a book and and now you're talking about. It, but what is this? How is this? I know from your memoir that you reflect on these things a lot. What? How has this been for you?
Mean, the yeah, there's a disjunction between, a feeling of personal and professional satisfaction, right?
Sure.
And then my understanding of my place in the world, as a citizen of a society, or a community of human beings where everything seems to be going wrong, everything seems to be going poorly. There's a tremendous amount of suffering, and I don't know. I've always had trouble like just flogging my my work. I've
I
just
feel that. It's hard.
yeah.
I think
I'm
you say
not good
something
at
about that
it.
in the memoir. It's like we're supposed to be,
Uh,
like, self-promoting, and it's hard
yeah.
to be that it's hard to be that guy.
It is, and maybe part of the reason that it's hard to be that guy I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for me, is because, I've spent enough time sort of judging people who I think are overly self-promoters, at
That
least in
yeah,
my own head, like, "Oh, come on, give it a rest," like, nobody cares, and then that's the thought that comes to me. It's like, "Okay, I'm gonna post something about my book." I'm proud of it. I obviously I want people to read it. I know that
absolutely.
some people are going to hate it. That's part of the deal, especially when you're publishing fiction. But I still want people to read it. Although otherwise, I wouldn't have written it. But who cares?
Yeah,
Like, there's a war going on, a war that's engulfing, more than half of the planet, that's causing tremendous suffering. Why should anybody give a shit about, a book that I published? Why should I expect them to give a shit? And I don't want to, just be rationalizing, things to myself, but it's like, well, as a fellow human being, I give a shit when, when somebody
mhm,
publishes a book I might be interested in reading, and then I find it easy to well, not easy, but I find it possible to give a shit about wanting to read a novel and to care about what's happening in Iran and Palestine and elsewhere. And so, I just have to kind of remind myself of that and say it's fine. You tell them about the book, and they
yeah,
can decide whether they care or not. I don't get to decide for them. But I also I do think it's important, especially in these moments, in these very intense geopolitical moments, to keep thinking about the what it means. Yeah, the poetry after Auschwitz question. What does it
yeah.
mean to be a writer, a creator, a reader, a consumer? In these moments of trouble, and are there ways that we can make real and significant and meaningful connections between the production and consumption of art and an interest in geopolitics, and I think that there are ways that we can.
Well, no, I definitely and I agree, and I think that there's a we can't be thinking about the war all the time, right? And this novel is a good way to, uh, look at a different part of the world and get inside your brain about your after I've read the memoir, especially that it kind of has a different resonance. You don't talk much about your time in Radford or at Radford or in was it Blue? Sorry, what uh,
Bluefield.
Bluefield, but
Hmm.
I can kind of but that, that is the environs out of which you come, and so it's an interesting, insight there. I do wanna hear any thoughts you have about what's going on in this war and what do you make of, what's happening, I won't even say in Iran or with Iran because it's really not Iran, it's like the entire region has suddenly been engulfed in a war that has no rationale, it appears. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm I mean, you've been watching events in this region for a long time. Uh, what do you make of what's going on, and what do you see on the horizon?
It's a straightforward and direct question, but in true academic fashion, I'm unable to answer it as straightforwardly as I would like, and certainly as
I would expect
straightforwardly
nothing
as
else. I would expect nothing else.
there we
It
go.
cannot be
I'm
it cannot be a straightforward answer.
It can't be, but I mean, like, there are ways you can think about it in terms of its geostrategic significance. Thinking about
Sure.
potential outcomes, you can look at it from like a military point of view, and I'm ill-equipped to do any of those things. I'm really thinking about it as I'm thinking about it a lot as a kind of reckoning.
Mm,
The world is being made, through forces that the great majority of us have no control over, to reckon with the Zionist genocide in Gaza.
mm,
That there's been too much for people in or most people in the US and Europe and other, quote unquote advanced societies. They've been able to continue living comfortably or relatively comfortably, that their lives haven't been disrupted, while people in Palestine and in Gaza specifically have been suffering tremendously. There's been mass displacement, mass death, mass everything. And I don't want to say that the bill is coming due for the West, because I don't think that that's necessarily the right way to look at it. But there are consequences to committing genocide, and if Iran weren't the main protagonist in those consequences, somebody else would have been eventually. In that,
mm,
you can't imagine that, so much suffering is going to continue blithely and unabated, and that there aren't going to be effects for people in the center of the countries that are producing the suffering. So, you
right.
know I'm thinking about it really in terms of how the world economy is being restructured in real time. Maybe the petrodollar is going to die. I hope it does. Maybe the free flow of oil, all around the world is going to be disrupted long term. And I don't know. I see I guess the current situation as one in which U.S. power, is imperial power, particularly, is being challenged in a way that I really have never seen in my lifetime. And it's been fascinating and interesting and a little bit hopeful to watch.
Well, you've got some silver linings here. The end of the petrodollar, maybe less oil being used, and end of the U.S. empire. Those all sound like you could probably that might be the good outcomes that we could look forward to. Um, uh, not something you're
That's
going to
what
hear.
that's what I'm hanging my hat on. Go
Well,
ahead.
I think you got to have hope. Um,
Yeah.
um, uh, Well, so I know, and I know you were in Lebanon for some time in Beirut. I don't know if there's contacts there that you're in contact with. I know that you have some personal connections in that region as well. Is that it? Are people there all right that you are in touch with, or what does it look like in Lebanon?
And all of my professional colleagues from my days at AUB, or the great majority of them, are gone. A lot
Ah,
of them actually ended up in Qatar at different institutions in Doha. And
okay.
so it was funny. I was in Doha a few months ago, and I got to see a lot of old colleagues from Lebanon, and it was wonderful. And they were saying, it's a very boring life here. It's not like Beirut, it's not like Cairo, but it's a very sort of clean and organized life, and how quickly things change. So
Yeah, totally,
I'm actually
totally.
more in touch with folks in the Gulf, but I'm following closely what's happening in Lebanon, and it's unconscionable. What the Zionist entity is doing there is horrid. 1 million plus people have been displaced. This is a country that already had poor infrastructure, that
Sure,
had a currency devaluation even worse than what's been happening in Egypt, that has a gap between wealth and poverty that's just very stark. And but I don't. I don't know what's let's say happening at a granular level. I know that AUB, where I used to work, has moved all of its classes online.
mm,
It's a dangerous place for a lot of people now. And even if the Israeli invasion manages to get repelled, and I very much hope that it does, there's the ever looming threat of even more civil war. And I think I would encourage the people outside of Lebanon, to think about it in terms of a deliberate practice of imperialism. Everybody has their hooks in Lebanon. The U.S. and Israel have long sought to destroy the resistance there. Israel has long sought to occupy South Lebanon again, as it occupied for many years in the past. But all in all, it's a deteriorating situation, and Israel obviously feels that it has the firepower and the resources to overrun the country. And like a lot of other people, I'm watching and praying that that's not the case.
did they miscalculated? Yeah, let's hope. Um, well, so I wanna kind of finish up. I confess part of my interest in speaking with you was purely personal. As I said, while my career as an academic was not nearly as prestigious, or as you put it a couple of times, notorious. When I was terminated last summer, one of the first things I thought of was your essay that shares the title with your memoir, An Honest Living, which is less about the spectacular events that led to the lapse of your academic career and more about what you chose to do after that, which was to drive a school bus in Northern Virginia. And given that so much of the memoir is about that period of your life, I thought I'd finish by just asking, what do you miss most about driving a bus? You're back in the classroom now. You're back in academe. What are you missing about
Mm,
driving a bus in Northern Virginia?
yeah. I'm going to answer that 1 second, and indulge me really quickly, because I want to
Sure.
say, to you and anybody who happens to be listening, that the question of you know prestige or accomplishment, or type of retribution, really is immaterial to the fact that harm is harm, and that we all experience harm in the same kind of way, and that there's a wonderful friendship and solidarity to be built, around these experiences of harm. And it doesn't matter whether they were public or private or anything else. So it's always a joy for me to be in conversation and community with people who have been through or are going through as similar situations. About the bus driving, I don't, I miss it a lot.
Do
I
you?
really do.
Yeah.
Once I came to Egypt, I saw, like, especially in Northern Virginia, the wages for school bus drivers really spiked. I've had to tell myself a bunch of times, it's like, I don't know, they might be getting paid more than professors. It's yeah, this is the one case where where the labor pool, had we're very much in a buyer's market, and
Sure,
and
sure.
and and so they could leverage that for higher wages. But I really, really miss the immediate sense of purpose that existed in that job. I really have a deep affection for children. I love joking with them and interacting with them, and this is a job that's sort of a mixture of transportation and babysitting in a
Right,
way.
right.
But you know I I got a tremendous amount of joy from dropping the kids off to their parents and grandparents in
Grandparents.
the
Yeah, you mentioned that
afternoon.
especially.
Yeah, that always stays with me. That's it was just a beautiful thing. It made me feel like I was doing really something meaningful in the world. Certainly nothing spectacular or impactful on a big scale, but it was impactful in unseen ways and ways that are lasting. And the type of let's say personal gratification you get from being a school bus driver is completely different than the type of gratification you get from being an academic. It's more immediate. It's known in a way. It's invisible.
Hmm.
Like the because school buses are all over pop culture. You see them in cartoons and shows like all the time. Like they show one when they want to, when they want to indicate to the audience that something is happening in a school setting or near a school. They
Sure.
always show the school bus in the background. It's part of our consciousness
So-
in the United States and really probably around the world. And but the driver is very much invisible.
yeah.
There have been some bus driver characters, notable ones like in The Simpsons,
And
and
Simpsons. Yeah, yeah.
Chris
But
Farley played one. I think famously about 15 or 20 years ago, but they're invisible. But in that invisibility, they're doing something profoundly impactful, for the children, who are going to and from school. And I enjoyed that very much. There was something that felt really, really, really uncorrupted about it, if that makes any sense.
sure. Well, and I think the section where you talk about just saying good morning, that sort of gives kids an understanding that they're being cared for and that someone is there. And so no, it is that immediacy is hard to find sometimes.
Yeah,
So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, and I am enjoying the books. Both of the novels, um, very different novels. So take your pick, and really like for the one, if you're interested in one to read during war, then the one about the assassin is gratifying in a different way. Um,
yeah.
uh, but I appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. So thanks,
It's been an honor. Thank you for having me.
and I appreciate the kinship, uh, uh, and your kind words. Um, so our next episode will return to our regular Wednesday schedule next Wednesday, April 1st at 11 a.m. Chicago time. We'll be speaking with Quinn Slobodian and Ben Tarnoff about their new book, Muskism, A Guide for the Perplexed, which is
Mhm.
billed as a, quote, pyrotechnic examination of Elon Musk as the symptom and avatar of our post-liberal age. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It'll be streaming there again. And this episode will also be available on the Breaking Culture Live YouTube channel. So please share it with your colleagues and let us know if you have any ideas for future episodes or invitees by emailing us at breakingculturelive@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm Sean Johnson Andrews. Please check out my Substack at breakingculture.substack.com. Until next time, take care.